Today I've got James with me, and today we're talking about the ICJ because there has been an update, I guess you'd say, in the case that's been brought by South Africa against Israel in front of the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of genocide. And particularly the kind of recent statements, I guess you'd say, have been aimed at halting the offensive in Rafah. So on Thursday, South Africa made their plea to the court, I guess you'd say, saying that the civilians in Gaza have nowhere else to go. Rafah is their one safe spot to be. So this offensive needs to be halted. And yesterday, on Friday, the Israeli side had their right of reply and said that they needed to go ahead because they needed to root out Hamas, and that interestingly, they were very forthright in saying that what South Africa wanted to do was to defend its ally, Hamas. That was openly what they said. So that was a gutsy thing to do. So, James, what do you think about this recent development?
Well, the entire thing is corrupt. The International Court of Justice is corrupt. It's a representative of the United Nations and the international law that we have so many times on this channel opposed. The accusation, as we've said many times on this show, is factually just so. It's not only false, it's premised on a lie that it uses language to turn around on Israel, specifically meant for Israel, like genocide or something. The Jews have been victims, as we've noted, of genocide in the last 100 years. This is no genocide. Just moving the population to Rafah shows you right there this was no attempt at genocide. Their attempt to move civilians, quote, civilians out of Rafah shows that there's no intent for genocide. On the face of it is factually false. On the face of it, there's no grounds for it. So it is absurd. The law that they're applying is actually immoral. This is not, they impose, it wasn't exactly what South Africa said. I guess we expect irrationality from them. They brought it in the first place. And Israel should never have responded at all. I do like that aspect of their response in which they said, y'all are pro-Hamas. And that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be framed if you were to make a response. But giving a response at all gives too much legitimacy to this court. And I heard from the court, one of the guys in the wigs who's wearing the black robe, it says that Israel has in effect been violating international law, but from what he can see, he uses the term genocide. He uses that kind of language, which shows and he imports all kind of just war theory, which we have in detail criticized here. It is the wrong way to approach a war. It is the immoral. I have moral objections to the requirements they place on Israel. I have moral objections even to the way Israel is conducting the war, which demonstrates that even their accusations are false. So let's imagine there had been double the number of casualties. Now, another thing we've discussed on this channel is the numbers, the dubious numbers that we've been getting from Hamas on the casualties. But let's say the casualties had been double or treble the number. That would not be relevant. There's no direct relevance to the numbers. The relevance is, are they eliminating the threat? A defender has a right to eliminate the threat. Hamas remains in Rafah. If Israel does not go into Rafah, it will be derelict in its responsibility to protect its own people. And therefore, what the World Court, the International Court of Justice, is saying, in effect, is that we must continue to have perpetual war. Israel cannot defend itself and be moral. Well, that is simply to attack Israel as such. The same standards surely would not be applied, say, to Ukraine in the way they wage a war, or any other war in modern times. The judge with the wig ridiculed Israel's claim to being the most moral army in the world, when by historical standards, they are engaged in the most gingerly surgical sort of a self-defensive operation I have ever heard of in the history of warfare. The charges are obscene. They pose as standing for a moral high ground when in fact they are evil. The doctrine they are advocating would necessitate more October 7th, which is what Hamas has promised. So it is a truly evil doctrine which would necessitate more October 7th. And I'm talking about the law that they're articulating from the bench, at the International Court of Justice. It is immoral. And so not only is its foundational legitimacy to be questioned, coming where it comes from, there is no such real thing as international law, in effect. It does not bind Israel, should not bind Israel in any way. They shouldn't even be the sanction of responding to it, because not only is the foundation wrong, but also the principles that they're applying wrong. The entire conceptual framework is itself immoral. So they're applying immoral standards in their alleged moral judgment and condemnation of Israel. No, they're the evil ones. They're the ones sanctioning evil. They're the ones necessitating further violence and atrocities and preventing Israel from eliminating this violent threat.
I think what was unusual about this, I don't normally follow the output of the ICJ outside of the conflict, is the fact that it was brought specifically over this offensive, if that makes sense. As terrible as it was that they brought general charges of genocide, I can see how under the kind of framework of the court that they can do that. But it's strange in a sense, they're legislating over this particular offensive. Almost, would it get to the point that South Africa could say, oh, they took this, they're taking this action right now, you need to stop them doing that? Every kind of particular military action. Is that something they have the authority to do?
I should hope not. How could you possibly engage in any war? How could the Allies have engaged in a war against the Nazis, 75 years, 80 years ago? It's inconceivable that anyone could do a real war, a war that would have an outcome, a victor, an end to Nazi totalitarianism and violence. That's the goal. And unless similarly we say this will bring an end to Hamas's capacity to do violence, there's nothing. And to second guess tactically on the battlefield every single move is a huge mistake. You could have done that, and according to their modern ethical standards, of course, we can question the firebombing of Dresden or the nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As such, those must have been over the top, too much, too evil, and that's generally the current mindset, that somehow killing is intrinsic, and this is a form of moral intrinsicism, which Ayn Rand was so eloquent in refuting, as if the killing itself is always wrong. Well, no, sometimes killing is necessary and good. I'll repeat that. Sometimes killing is necessary and good if you're killing a killer who means more killing. Under those circumstances, killing is very just, good, and proper. It really comes down to that. If you're a subjectivist, and I think there's a good deal of subjectivism here, you won't have any need to apply your standards consistently. So, for example, if the Chinese are engaged in atrocities and a genocide, actual kind of genocide against the Uyghurs, the Muslim population of Eastern China, of course, that isn't the same thing and can't be judged on the same standards. Or if the Ukrainians do something in defense against the Russian invasion, that must be judged by an entirely different standard. So the subjectivism gives them floating standards so that they can particularly zero in on Israel with exception, and the moral intrinsicism allows them to say, well, any dying, look at the dead baby. A picture of a dead baby is all I need, and I know that Israel is engaged in total evil. Well, that is context dropping, and in both cases, in fact, it's context dropping, and can only screw you up, morally speaking. This is bad moral thinking that lies at the root of all of this.
Yes. And so the South African side made, I guess what you'd say is the typically hyperbolic, let's say, statements that they've made in the past that, the Rafah operation threatens the very survival of Palestinians in all of Gaza. And the Israeli representatives were, as I said, pretty robust and impressive in their response, at least on a couple of things, saying that this is completely divorced from the facts. Armed conflict isn't a synonym for genocide. You can't treat it that way. And there was one shocking moment, just in terms of, I guess, the sanctity of a courtroom, where one of the Israeli representatives had someone stand up and start shouting "liar" at her during her statement. And one of the things that we noted just before we went live, James, is that actually some of the reporting on this from the left-wing press, which you would expect to be especially sympathetic towards South Africa's case and anti-Israel, was actually fairly more muted on this and, less rabidly anti-Israel. And what should we make of that? Do you think people are getting that the Rafah offensive, it does have to go ahead, or are we reading, am I reading too much into that?
I think what we read into that is the moral confusion, the moral crisis of our times. They don't have a clear morality. They really haven't thought through the morality of war. They have certain religious based, even back up for a second. Take our new atheists, the late Christopher Hitchens, the late Professor Daniel Dennett, Dawkins, Sam Harris. When they talk morality, they really have they've accepted Hume's is-ought gap. You can never derive an objective ought from an is. And stuck in this world, they are, by their own confession, in effect, moral subjectivists. And moral subjectivism plagues the secular left endemically. They have strong, and in effect, even if you're an atheist, when you have moral views, they will come out dogmatically. They will come out religiously. And so you'll note this dogmatic ferocity against what Israel is doing, as if they're committing crimes against humanity. These are obvious atrocities that Israel is doing, forgetting the atrocities, of course, of October 7th, who is the self-defender and who's the aggressor, etc. They'll forget all about Palestinian behavior and focus just on Israel's behavior, when, of course, Palestinian behavior, just one fact, Hamas doesn't wear uniforms. And in so doing, Hamas is killing their own civilians, of course, making it impossible for Israel to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. So Hamas is necessitating the killing of civilians. Rather than incorporating that into their moral reasoning, the intrinsicism, the dogmatism about killing as such is what dominates them, because it's really just an emotionally held premise. Because even our secular friends on the left have no clear view of ethics. And absent an objective view of ethics, it comes out religiously, dogmatically, inconsistently. Sometimes it applies here, sometimes it doesn't. But in any case, we're going to be just as dogmatic and religious as, say, a conservative Christian would be about his morality. And that's the problem, moral confusion. Turning to the right, by the way, you often find people who are equally in trouble, because their intrinsicist views say turn the other cheek, forgive everybody, and might turn them into a Gandhi-type pacifist. So if your view of morality is conservative intrinsicist, it's not going to tell you how to do a just war. If you have a completely subjectivist view of morality, like so many on the left do, again, whatever moral judgments come out are just going to be subjective in their root and dogmatic in their application. It comes down to emotions. And if that's really the case, then it also gives room, let's put it, for the anti-Semitism that underlies some of this, the anti-civilization, anti-liberal ideas that are so dominant today. That gives voice to that. If Israel represents civilization, no. Progress, no. What it represents is colonialism in the Marxist sense. Don't you see? They're oppressing the poor indigenous peoples of the Middle East. And if you look at it through that framework, which they impose upon the whole thing, of course, again, you're begging for the exactly the wrong answer. You can't make there are moral distinctions to make in war. War is a subject that should be the proper subject of moral analysis, of an objective moral analysis. The initiation of force, as objectivists, we know to be always wrong in human affairs. Aggressive force is always wrong. The only morally legitimate use of force is in response, self-defense, retaliation to an aggressor. That is the only morally justifiable use of force. When you understand that, when you understand that the real distinction is not between imperialism and the poor colonialist victims, but between aggressor and defender, then you have more objective, clear moral concepts which can actually understand what the needs and objectives of a war are. But given that the existing confusion on both sides, how can you ever win a war? How could there ever be a decisive outcome to this war, given the moral premises that both sides sort of walk in with?
And then we have a couple of super chats. So we have $5 from Jonathan. Thank you, Jonathan, who says, thank you, James, for your tireless insight. There you go. And then we have $1 from Bonnie. Thank you so much, Bonnie. And James, I just wanted to get your sense of how you think this case is progressing, because we're seeing these kind of, regular updates, but it's something that's ticking away in the background the whole time. Do you think it's something, is your sense of it that the case is going to come out and say that Israel is committing genocide, or do you think this is all going to be a big waste of everyone's time and and it is an attempt to smear Israel, but do you think it will just amount to it being an attempt to smear and nothing more significant than that?
Well, my prediction will depend upon what happens, because this whole ridiculous exercise that we're going through is designed to pressure Israel to back off, back down, slow down, not do it. And what it's designed to do is affect the ground, events on the ground. At the end of the day, whether Israel is found to have committed crimes against humanity or not will be a function of, did Israel succeed? To the extent I think Israel actually succeeds, they will be condemned as, they'll be compared to Adolf Hitler, right? And if they back off, if they cower back, as the international community is demanding them to, then I suspect they'll get a more favorable outcome, at least a more equivocal outcome, because all of this exercise is simply designed to manipulate Israel.
Yes. And unfortunately, it seems like no matter what the court says, it will be taken in a way that's anti-Israel, because obviously they made their initial ruling, let's say, and the way that that was reported was that they had said that Israel was plausibly committing genocide. And what was interesting was a statement that came from Joan, I'm forgetting her surname, who was the president of the court at the time, the US judge, who appeared on TV and said that she'd like to take the opportunity that she was there to say that that wasn't what they had ruled. Now, the actual ruling that she said they made sounded a bit convoluted and specific. I don't know. Did you see this clip I'm talking about, James?
I
She
haven't
said,
seen the clip, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
yeah, she says that the court didn't find that Israel was plausibly committing genocide. The court found that it was plausible that the Palestinians had a right to be protected from genocide, which was a bit strange. I mean, one, I want to hear your thoughts about that, but then also, if she's right that it was this other specific thing that they found on it, it wasn't saying that they plausibly committed genocide. That's certainly how it was reported, and that's how everyone took it.
Right.
So
Right.
almost no matter how they do it, it'll seem like it'll be spun to be the anti-Israel way.
Well, in legal proceedings, and I am a recovering attorney, I admit, in legal proceedings, there'll often be these initial prima facie hoops that you have to get through in an initial, whether it's an indictment or a preliminary hearing, or, do we even have grounds to consider this case? And they're not making any kind of final determination. They're just saying you have enough evidence to proceed with your case against Israel. And that's all that they were saying, I think, is how we have to interpret what she's saying. But even that's corrupt. Even that's corrupt. Even if everything that we know to be true on the ground factually is true, there has not yet been made, even under my reading of existing international law. I don't think there's a prima facie case against Israel. Now, I reject even the law as it exists. I think it's immoral and wrong, and it badly constrains a defender from what they can properly do. But even under this corrupt law, I don't think a prima facie case has been made. So I disagree with that initial ruling, but she is correct in saying we have come to no final factual conclusion on the matter. All we've said is that we will hear the case, because the Palestinians have a right for us to consider whether they're the victims of genocide. But how would that not be the case against any two groups in conflict? I mean, the Nazis would have had, at some point in World War II, if such a court had existed, a right to come and say, hey, the British and the Americans are engaged in a potential genocide against the German people in 1943, 1945, when they start really kicking our butt. So it's not much of a ruling. It doesn't factually tell us anything. It's conceptually corrupt, based on morally corrupt standards, and they haven't even met their morally corrupt standards by any sound epistemological standard. if all of that makes sense.
Yes, yes, yes. Um, there was something that I saw tweeted by Greg Salmieri the other day, which I thought was right, and I think people should keep in mind, which is that if any claims which are being made against Israel in this war for having committed genocide or something like that could be used in an example of a justified war where we know there is no genocide taking on. If it could be used in the context of that war, like World War II, like the British and the Americans fighting together against the Germans, if it could be used to say that the British and the Americans are committing genocide, then what you've got is ultimately just a smear against military action that you don't like, and there's no real grounds for saying it's genocide. And pretty much all of the things that South Africa's case, as I remember in their opening statements, pointed to, I think could be very much said to have gone in the Second World War. I remember, for example, they were pointing to, Israeli soldiers saying we're going to get rid of the son of Amalek or something like that, kind of like, I don't know, the way soldiers speak to each other. So if you went to a barracks in World War II, the way that soldiers would have been speaking about the Germans, I mean, I think it probably would have been appalling.
Oh, Krauts and Huns.
Yeah,
We would use ethnic slurs against the Germans and the soldiers commonly. In World War One, I think the preferred term was Hun. In World War Two, the preferred term was Kraut. And they're using in effect an ethnic slur during the world wars when we're fighting a really an aggressive country. When Germany is starting wars, if someone were to say, "Hey, you're using those ethnic slurs against Germans," doesn't that show an indication that you really want to wipe out all German-speaking people or something? That
yeah,
would be a non sequitur, as events of history actually proved, and a ridiculous one, right? There is no. I have never met an Israeli who wouldn't love it if the Palestinian people decided to live in peace with Israel. Never. However, I've heard Palestinian after Palestinian after Palestinian promise us that we'll have October 7th after October 7th, Israel must be smashed, river to the sea, worldwide intifada, etc., etc. And indeed, this entire perverse attack on Israel as war criminals or engaged in genocide is itself such a perverse inversion of the moral truth of things that we're not in the realm of actually sound moral discussion. These people, this whole international court, what is its basis in morality? Could they give us their foundations? Could they tell us where they are they getting it from Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine? Who are they getting it from? Are they getting it from General Patton or are they getting it from Mohandas Gandhi? I mean, what is the morality? And until and unless someone can lay out, now there are laws, but those are so ambiguous in my view, also corrupt in my view, that they do not provide a proper moral foundation for even morally evaluating how a country is engaged in war. And these people have no intent actually on spelling that out so that we would have a consistent doctrine that would apply equally to all nations, which of course is a basic requirement of fair law, just law. It has to be objective. The people beforehand have to know what would be an atrocity, a war crime, and what wouldn't be. But they don't even have a moral standard for that.
mm. Yes, I remember my grandmother, who died a few years ago, was a member of she was a Wren, one of the Women's Royal Naval Service, and to the end of her days, I'm a she was a nice lady interpersonally, but if the Japanese were ever brought up, she was a real racist, and that itself is not proof that the British Army, if let's
Oh
say
my
that's widespread,
gosh.
were committing genocide.
American, the American Navy had a whole group of ethnic slurs for the Japanese during World War II. Not to say that ethnic slurs are good,
No, for
but
sure.
at least, let me do this at least. At least the recognition was that we were fighting the Japanese people, the Japanese people who supported that government. So many Japanese people who were suicidally, religiously committed to their emperor in support of that aggressive war that they launched in East Asia against China, the Philippines, Hawaii. They were the aggressors, and our war was against the Japanese government and people, not just against Tojo, let's put it that way, and his inner leadership circle, which is the way we approach it with Hamas, which is bizarre. No, it is the population which supports Hamas, which is also the enemy of Israel, which can also be a valid target. And until we understand that, again, we're not going to achieve moral clarity on this.
Certainly. And then we have two super chats. One from PC who gives £5. Thank you very much. He says South Africa is pro Hamas. certainly, I think in this case, that's what that amounts to. And again, I was impressed by, I think it was his name was Gilad Noam, one of the Israeli representatives who stood up and said that. I mean, that's a great thing that to say in that forum, and it's something that needs to be said much more frequently. And then
Yes.
Jonathan Honig gives another $5. Thank you, Jonathan. And he says, check out Leonard Peikoff's new book, Can You Really Love a Dog? Leonard Peikoff and Ayn Rand as you've never seen them. That's the new book for anyone who doesn't know that
And
Jonathan
I
worked
love
with.
that book. I'm a dog lover. Ayn Rand was a cat lover. I'm a dog lover, but yeah, you can really love a pet, and I love that book. You'll see photos you don't see of Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff anywhere else. Um, it's a wonderful book.
Yeah, it sounds cool. All right, James. We've just got a few minutes left. Any final thoughts about this case or anything else pertaining to the war?
Just in general, these international bodies are themselves not something we can cite as moral authorities. All the people that do, and I mean, it's true that the New York Times and the Guardian have been a little more balanced on this particular thing because I think that reflects their moral confusion. But we have to clarify that moral confusion. These international bodies have no moral authority, have no moral legitimacy, and have no real binding effect on Israel. And we have to make that point clearly. We have to make the point clearly that they don't have correct moral standards. This court itself has no legitimate foundations. And indeed, the entire United Nations is a moral corruption insofar as it includes and protects the worst dictatorships in this world, like China, Russia, Iran. Such an organization is itself corrupt and can't. No one can just cite, the Court of International Justice, and they're the moral authority, and that ends argument. No, ladies and gentlemen, it is as if nothing was said.
Mhm. For sure. Well, guys, we're going to wrap up. Thank you very much for watching. Do make sure you keep tuned because we'll give you updates as the court trial progresses. And we'll certainly by the time they come out with their final verdict. Actually, that'll be in like 13 years. In 13 years, we'll give you, coverage of
I
that.
guarantee it won't be until this thing is better wrapped up, because then we can evaluate Israel. You see,
Mm,
they're just trying to pressure Israel. Yeah.
for sure. We'll give you a final verdict. Just a couple of things from us. So sometime next week, we're going to be launching our News Digest newsletter. Some of you guys had mentioned that you guys like to come to us to hear the latest updates on the war, and you try and avoid some of the mainstream sources because they're so appalling. And so, what we're doing from next week is we're doing a new newsletter, which is going to be providing a digest, not just on the war, but of general news as well. And if you guys sign up to our main newsletter, which you can get on our website, there's just a little bar at the bottom where you can put your email in. We'll be doing the first one of those for free, just so you can see if you like it. And you'll also then get onto our normal newsletter as well. So, and then after the first one's gone out, that's going to be available to gold members. That's £25 a month. So if you guys like it, you can sign up for that. And that should be really great. So I hope to see you guys to hear if you like it. But okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Tomorrow we'll be back with the Daily Objective and the reality show Extra for ARC UK members and YouTube channel members. We're going to be talking about the Netflix show Baby Reindeer, which is exploded in recent weeks. We're going to be talking about a bit about the show, so we're going to be talking about whether we like it, but also about whether it's factual. Can we even evaluate that? A bit about the real life figures who have emerged and all that kind of stuff. So that should be lots of fun. I hope to see
Fascinating.
you there. Yeah, it
Yeah.
should be a good one. Hope to see you guys there. Bye bye.